Hello, my friends. I think we're now on day 20 of our Advent devotions. If I'm wrong, I apologize. I've lost count. But we're continuing our journey right now through Isaiah, looking at those prophecies, those shadows, the foreshadowing, the hints of the coming Savior. Isaiah is full of these things, and we've already looked at three different chapters. We talked about the sign of Emmanuel, that the Messiah was going to be God with us. What else we looked at in chapter 9? It was, to us, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light, that a child is going to be born, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, talking about the reign of, he's going to reign like David, a descendant of David. We looked at the shoot off the root of Jesse yesterday in chapter 11. Very majestic, very king-focused ruler sorts of prophecies that Jesus is going to be this king, descended from David, ruling over God's people in righteousness and justice. And then Isaiah takes a different turn in some of the prophecies that he has later, some of the verses that refer to the Savior. There is a section later in Isaiah, starting at about chapter 42. I'll put the exact verses in the notes here in a few minutes. But there are 4 different places. They're called servant songs. And it starts to talk about this anointed one, this one that God is going to send, not as a king, not as one who necessarily rules in majesty, but as a servant. And it's a much different picture of who this servant is going to be. It starts in chapter 42, is the first reference. Here is my servant whom I uphold. God's going to put his spirit on this servant, and then it talks about how he will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out. He talks about how the servant is going to establish justice, but it's a very calm, peaceful, not powerful, not violent, but a very caring sort of peace. As a servant, taking care of someone. A couple of chapters later, Isaiah talks about the servant in chapter 49. And again in chapter 50, it comes up again. This servant comes up again. But the most interesting one comes in the end of chapter 52. This is the 4th of the servant songs, so-called. And in chapter 52, starting at verse 13, Isaiah starts talking about this servant as he's speaking for God. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Again, it's this king idea, but this is the servant king. And then Isaiah goes on and starts talking about how he's going to be raised up and highly exalted, even though there were many who were appalled at him. His appearance was so disfigured, and his form marred beyond human likeness. Go down in chapter 53. This continues into chapter 53. And you read that, go read it yourself, Isaiah chapter 53. And lots of it reads as if Isaiah is standing on the cross, at the foot of the cross, watching as Jesus suffers. We often read it on Good Friday. Verses like, surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. We considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions. All of these verses come in the context of this servant song. Isaiah talking about the servant that God is going to send. The servant who is Jesus. Not just a king, not just one who rules in power and majesty, but one who gets down and serves and does the dirty work, does the hard work of caring for his people, of taking our sin, of taking our punishment, and serving us. an interesting aspect of what Isaiah has to tell us. So I'll put those verses in the notes here in a few minutes. Go back and read them. They're about 4 sections that talk about this servant. It's a very interesting read. God be with you. We'll talk again tomorrow.